Welcome to the Goddess Astrology Podcast. I'm Gary Caton in the New River Valley of Southwest Virginia. You can find me on the web at dreamastrologer.com. And yes, you heard me right. I'm invoking the original title of my podcast, Goddess Astrology Podcast, that I began back in 2008. And that's because we're doing a joint or mutual podcast with my Sky Astrology Conference partner and goddess astrologer extraordinaire, Andrea Michelle Kennedy. So, welcome to the show, Andrea, and thank you so much for having me on yours.
I'm excited, Gary. Thank you. This has been a while coming. I know we talked about something at the Sky Astrology Conference,
Yeah,
um, and I'm just really stoked to be doing this with you. So,
yeah, me too. I was so proud of the work that you did there, and I really wanted to express how just it feels so great to see people becoming more themselves, and I can really see it in what you're doing, and it's
mhm.
amazing.
Thank you. That's an honor from you because well, you're one of the top astrologers, if not like the handful of three that I consider a true
Yay. I love being
mage.
part of threes.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Thrice Great Homie, as we affectionately call each other. But yeah, it was really interesting, just as a fun aside, that we discovered we were not only born in the same Chinese astrological year of the monkey, but we're also Jaguars, the day sign of the Mayan
Yep.
calendar, the Solcan, and we're also um, what are we? Oh, we both have Mercury as our Mutant. So
Yeah.
there's that
So
thrice
thrice
great,
great homies.
thrice great homies. Yeah, I love it.
Monkey, Jaguar, Hermes. Yeah.
Hermes, exactly.
Woo!
Woohoo!
It's kind of doubling down on the monkey part, I think.
It
But
is
the
doubling down
Jaguar's enough to kind of woo, chill it and deepen it, right?
deep
So
in it.
that it's not just like you.
Exactly, exactly. So good. Yeah. So
Hmm.
I love this, and I wanted to introduce myself real quick. I'm Andrea Michelle, and I go by Heckle, but also Kennedy because most people
Oh,
know me.
sorry.
Nope, no problem.
I
I
never
changed it on
quite
people.
know. I never quite know which one we're on. Sorry.
I know, I get it. So all good, all good. Um, and my website is just andreamichelleheckle.com, and I was introduced, I just want to say I was introduced to the work of Adam Gainsbourg and the Light of Venus back in 2012, um, right after a very, very difficult period earlier that year, an initiatory period. Um, and I was so grateful to find that depth of work because astrology had been coming in for me, but I hadn't really found a teacher. I hadn't really, and Adam was the first person that like was transmitting something that I'm like, wow, there's something really deep here. And I'm
Hmm.
glad that I learned about the cycles, heliacal and synodic cycles early on, that it's
Yes,
like the foundation of my astrology because it's just proven to be so
that is in fact
rich.
where astrology began. So begin at the beginning. I
At the
think
beginning.
no, I think it's incredible that that was the starting place for you, and I think if I had my way, it would be the starting place for everybody that works with me.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
really it's really the primary reality of astrology is a human being standing on the earth looking out at the horizon. That's and what I've been talking about lately is that the zodiac is actually a radically different viewpoint because
Mm.
when you're looking at the horizon, you can only see half of the zodiac at any given time. In order to see the zodiac wheel that we're familiar with as a horoscope or whatever, you have to take basically a radically disembodied view from the point of view of the North Pole of the ecliptic, like a God's eye view of, and that was a radical departure for the Greeks from what came previously.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that returning back to the horizon is a profoundly initiatory experience because it returns us to the beginning. It returns us to the embodied form of
Yeah.
astrology. And it's been a huge game changer for me. So I'm really happy to be sitting here talking to somebody who that's their starting place, because
Yeah.
I feel like that's something that can be a profound um, experience for people, and I'm hoping more and more and more astrologers get that experience.
Mhm.
Kind of like a mission for me at this point.
Yeah. And I love what you're saying because it's a uniquely human perspective.
Yeah,
Can't forget our humanity and
yeah,
our viewpoint. Like, and the beautiful kind of the like the edge walker that we are as human beings, to remember the greater context of ourselves as beings beyond before our earthly incarnation, but through the lens of our earthly humanness, which includes
yeah.
everything.
Hmm.
And it's anyway, yeah. So I just I
Sorry if
love.
I cut you off on introducing yourself there, but
No, it's okay. It's
you're
good.
talking to an Aries. I'm going to butt in now and then.
Okay, I'm getting more of my Aries on too recently. But and that, we can speak a little bit. I know we talked before we started recording about we both had very recently new initiatory, you could say,
Hmm.
experiences. And as we know, an initiatory experience is an ongoing process, right? There's a seed moment or moments or time period, and it's then our marching orders, you could say, for a time. And we
Hmm.
develop in even greater context and embodied reality of it. And so
Yeah.
walking it like you did on the Camino,
Hmm.
and that's the beginning of it. That's kind of like your devotion to what you
Hmm.
received and making it happen. The Camino is kind of like you wake up every day and you do it. That's the devotional nature, right?
Yep.
So if you have anything you wanted to share just around that before.
Ah, I mean, first of all, thank you so much to Olga Weso,
Mm.
my student of my student, Paloma Todd Montes, and thank you so much to Paloma for translating the Venus material that Adam gave to you and I gave to Paloma, and she translated it into Spanish, and so many people are
Wow.
vibing with this material now in the Spanish speaking countries all over the world. That in itself, like, incredible, right? And then to celebrate that with Adam in Barcelona, all four of us together, it's like I can't even begin to describe what that was like. I'll say this: I set a new personal record for hugs that day. I,
Woohoo!
yes, there was like 70 people there, which is really good
Wow.
turnout for an astrology
Yeah.
event, even in the States.
Wow.
Um, and I think I hugged at least 60 of them. Yeah, because it was just felt so good. And the other thing that was really cool for me is I've been giving astrology talks for a long time, and people frequently come up to me afterwards and say, well, this or that thing you said had an effect on me because blah blah blah. And often, it's like intellectual or stuff or whatever. But this time everybody came up and just said, I really could feel you.
Mm.
And I was so proud of that I was, because the event was centered around like honoring the elders and the transmission, and honoring the new people who are taking up the torch, and it was about community and feeling. And so I was like, yeah, like I managed to drop in on that level clearly, because people were telling me all the feedback was like, I could really feel your heart. And yeah, that was so beautiful, and it's beyond even words. And yeah, walking the path after that with our Venus tribe, so many experiences of just tremendous natural beauty. It's such a beautiful country. I was able to visit six different provinces in like
Wow.
36 days. We were in Madrid. We visit La Mancha briefly, and then Catalonia, which is where Barcelona is, and then Leon, and uh, Galicia, and then
Mhm.
finally Astoria. And everywhere, like especially the mountains, for some reason, like I didn't realize Spain had those kind of mountains, and
Mm.
I pushed myself up many of them, and and yeah, like being like arriving at the top and just this this vista must be maybe the Aquarius in me. I've always felt like home. It's a place you can't stay though. That's the weird
Mm.
thing about it. It's like it's the place I probably feel the most at home are these vistas, these high vistas, but it's not a place you can stay. It's just this brief feeling of home, of belonging.
Mm. Mm.
And it's so overwhelming. Like if I try to talk about it, I just start crying.
Mm.
It's like,
You're emanating it, Gary. You don't need to say a word. Exactly.
ah,
Yeah. But you're carrying that
so
belonging with you. That's the
yeah,
beauty. Yeah.
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 And and it was experiencing that like from across an ocean, across a cultural barriers, across language barriers, like I've experienced that obviously plenty of times, here in the Blue Ridge Mountains, especially even out in Colorado, but to experience it like across so many borders and boundaries and stuff. Yeah, I think I'm going to be integrating that for a long time, actually.
Yeah.
Mm,
Oh, wow. Wow, I didn't realize you'd been to so many different parts of Spain. That's cool too.
yeah, yeah. We packed a lot. And Olga is an Aries too, and she's just ready to go for it.
Yeah.
And, I just love her so much. When she brought this up, I just instantly said yes. I didn't really
Mhm.
think about what I was getting myself into.
Right. Oh, that's
But
exactly right.
but we did, and we saw Venus rise
Mm.
over the Atlantic, and she was the first one to see it, which I thought was just so beautiful and perfect because she did all the work organizing all this. It's a
Wow.
tremendous amount of work, and I'm really proud of her. Um, and she was the first one to see it, and she was just squealing and like like a kid, and all the women were having a great time, and I just was like, oh. And her uncle is like this older man who has a house there. He said he's been coming there for 17 years and he's never seen the weather that perfect for what we were trying to do in 17 years. It was
Wow.
like perfectly clear. The stars were out afterwards. The Milky Way was out. It was, and the next day, it was like completely socked in with fog and all this stuff. And he's like, yeah, this is actually typical. Like what you
Wow.
saw last night was something of a miracle, really.
Fantastic.
So
Wow.
yeah, and the message I got from Venus, actually later when we got back to Olga's house in Madrid, we saw Venus, and the message I got was there's more, much
Mm.
more.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I'm really looking forward to that, to be part of this new community, new way of being, new consciousness, if you will, that is Venus transmitting her essence through astrology, through astrologers, through peregrinos, whatever. It's like everything I could have possibly asked for and
Yeah.
more.
Beautiful, Gary. Gosh. Well, as you and I also talked about before we got on, we had planned to record a podcast before each of us, well, I didn't exactly go anywhere, but before you went on the Camino and before I realized something was deeply shifting in me and I was closing out a chapter, a larger chapter. But um,
You want to talk about that? Do you want to talk about your initiation?
yeah, I'll share a little. It's so funny because you know, my students and clients and people who hear me talk on podcasts or whatever often hear me espouse the the potency and poignancy of working with one aspect, transit, relationship in the chart and devoting ourselves to that. That
Really
because we are,
focusing in
yes,
and
because
digging down deep with it, huh?
yeah, walking with it, letting
Yeah.
it walk with us.
Mm,
because we are holographic in nature. That is our doorway into everything.
mm,
And we are in a nervous system run culture. Like I said, where our minds are like crack addicts and we just have to have the latest hit. We feel like we have to know what every astrologer is talking about, this transit or that transit. And nothing gets ingested. Nothing really gets, well, not nothing. I don't want to say it like that. But we are potentially missing out on opportunities to really form a relationship. And how do we pick one transit or one thing in our chart and work with that over time? Because that
mm.
literally is showing, you could say, our deeper essence, our soul. We're
Really
committing.
squeeze it for all the juice and all the nutrients and all the yummy
Yes,
depth and complexity. Yeah.
exactly. And learning
Yes.
to digest it, which I feel is one of the things that
Mm,
Mercury in this retrograde starting in
mm,
Virgo is
yeah.
learning what it takes to really assimilate and digest
Wow.
and
Yeah.
get the nutrients out of whatever it is that we're doing.
Mm,
Otherwise, it just stays in our heads. And of course, as we know, Virgo is the second brain, it's the gut, which
yeah.
Mercury also rules. And we need to have a relationship with that brain.
Really, it's the first brain because
Exactly. Yeah.
it was because of our, well, we started cooking our food and that actually um assisted our gut in being able, because cooked food is much easier to assimilate.
Yes. Yeah.
And after we started cooking our food, and the gut was able to assimilate more, it led to the development of a big brain.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's really kind of the first brain, if you
It
know what I'm saying.
is.
Not
Exactly. And it's,
quibbling, but since we're on a Virgo thing.
no, you're right. Absolutely. Yeah. Exactly. But
Mm,
I would agree, Gary. I call it the first brain. It's and so much of us are disconnected from the lower half of our bodies, you know. That's
mm,
where we store trauma and stuff. So it's no wonder. So it takes a lot of courage and it takes a lot of commitment to continually hold ourselves accountable in a way to how much do I really want to grow? Do my, knowing more information in our heads is not translatable into a lived, actionable way of being.
yeah,
It's a start, absolutely.
yeah.
But if we stay there and we don't go into the actual assimilation and receiving, and that's what I love about retrograde loops too. They're open-ended. It's kind of like a space, like Mercury
Mm,
is creating a space. Even the Z's, they're open-ended, especially. It's like, how do we give ourselves room to stop and not have to keep going linearly? That's the
yeah.
beautiful thing about Mercury is like it's the linear mind, but also not. That's the paradox that Mercury is. Mercury, I love your story about you bring it like Mercury walked backwards. Like one of the first things he did after his birth was go backwards, right? It's just like, is Mercury for, linearity or is he not? Well, he's both. He's the
Yeah.
capacity in us to hold both polarities, to not
Mm,
have to stay in the either or paradigm.
yeah.
So one of the things, this initiation, I guess you could say, the closing out of one chapter and the opening of another is with this Aries solar eclipse that happened in April. There
Mm,
were a couple of things that were closing out for me, a longer term mentorship program that I was in for a long time. And also because I have North Node in Aries and it all happening in my 12th house, I was discovering more of like my rawness, the desire to be fully immersed in life, 12th
mm.
house, all of life. Like what is it
Wow.
like to emerge still connected to all of life, but as a unique individual, right?
Mm, wow.
And so there's this, again, people who have been listening or watching me, I have this really strong desire to reconnect to what I call our first home, or
Mm,
as Craig Foster, my octopus teacher, calls our first mother, which he calls the ocean, the mother of mothers,
yes.
and
Yes.
which I absolutely love. And
The Alchemist, well, Mircea Eliade, a famous author, he talks about that in Alchemy, like everything goes back to water.
it
Yeah.
does. Our cerebral spinal fluid is
Yeah.
like very similar to the ocean.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Everything comes out of the ocean. I don't want to go off on a tangent, but I'm also discovering the beauty and the intelligence of water through this New Zealand researcher called Veda Austin. Anyway, it's just insane that water is the alchemical solution. It's so humble, water, and so like ubiquitous that we forget its power. And that's what makes it
Yeah,
powerful, is because it's not
extremely
ostentatious. It's
powerful.
not,
Yeah.
we are 2/3 water by volume, but we're 99% water by molecular structure.
Mm.
Anyway, I'm diverting, but there's just something about returning to the instinctual intelligence.
Mm.
And so with this Aries solar eclipse that took place in April, each decan of Aries was, there was a planet in each decan of Aries. Venus was in the first decan in
Mm.
Aries. The eclipse happened in the second decan at 19 degrees, right, with Chiron. The sun and moon were with Chiron. And then in the third decan was Eris and Mercury retrograde partile conjunct at 24 degrees. And then subsequently, I discovered asteroid Pan was exactly there with them. Here we have two half human, half animal asteroids in the mix. Chiron in the heart of the solar eclipse, and Pan right there with Eris and Mercury. And I was astonished because I didn't recognize that until afterwards. I was like, I'm like, I wonder where Pan is in the mix. So
Wow.
for me,
Yeah.
that is an
Ben was
invitation.
really closely conjunct Eris, right?
Yep, yep.
Wow. Do we want a visual of that?
Yeah, I would
Yeah.
love, I don't
I
know.
got it.
Oh, you got it. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was like astonishing to me. And it's just, so what's been emerging from that is this literally emerging, like not looking for it, but coming up is this orientation to the decans or decans, however we want to pronounce it.
Mm. I
And
like to say deacons
deacons,
'cause
okay.
it sounds like deacon of a church.
Right, deacon. So yeah, I love that you brought this up, Gary. So there we have, um,
Venus is in the first
yep,
deacon,
yep. And then
the
we've got the,
eclipse with Chiron in the second deacon, and then
yeah,
Pan, Eris, and Mercury in the third deacon, right?
exactly. And
Mm.
Mercury, like almost like making space retrograde to come back to the beginning, like you were
Mm-hmm.
talking about. And
Mm.
that's been a theme for me for a long time. I would say my very first initiation, you could say, was from, well, you could, the redwood trees, but there is also something about go back to the beginning, go back to the beginning.
Yeah.
And that's Aries, right? But this is another octave of Aries. This is not go back to the same beginning. It's like go back to the beginning at another rung of the spiral, because life
Wow.
is,
Yeah.
spiral.
I love that. That's been a theme in my life too, really. I remember when I was studying to be a counselor, like, talking about like where to begin and like begin where the client is, right? Like, hello, like,
Yeah,
like begin at the beginning where somebody actually is right now,
yeah,
you know?
exactly,
Um,
exactly.
and now, like I was talking before, the beginning for astrology is the horizon. Like it was 2,000 years of experience of people walking up the stairs to a ziggurat to observe and record what they saw from the horizon. 2,000 years, 30 generations
Yeah,
before we ever had ephemerides and charts as we know it,
yeah.
you know? So, yeah, wow, I love that idea of going back to the beginning. It's so freaking powerful.
It is. It is. And it's going to mean something different for all of us, right?
Sure.
And that's what makes it, that's the unique quality of being a human being.
Do we need this chart anymore?
No, no, thank you, Gary.
Okay, yeah.
But I also, oh, well, and I love that the ruler of all that Aries is Mars with Saturn in Pisces. It's almost like breaking out of old archetypes to
Yeah.
create a new, to have them emerge. Not that we can create them, like we have to be humble and recognize we can't create new archetypes with our minds just because we want, create what we want. It's like learning to live as these new archetypes that are emergent in us.
Wow.
And
Yeah, Pisces is it's interesting because it's the last sign,
yeah,
but it's the ocean. It's the beginning, you know?
exactly. It's what's the beginning? Exactly, exactly. It's like Aries is the beginning of our human experience,
Mm,
or it's like, but it's still true because Mars or Aries emerges out of the waters. Exactly. So
yeah.
how do we maintain a connection, Mars and Pisces, to our original mother of mothers as we
Mm,
venture out? And so this has been a theme for me personally, and what's coming through in terms of how I want to practice astrology is to help people immerse back into their first home, the home even before of the human culture of our animal, vegetable, and or vegetal and mineral kingdoms. Like
mm,
our kin in that way, like all
yeah,
our relations, as the indigenous say.
yes.
And it's not just some fanciful thing. It's like something that's coming alive in my body. It's like, oh yeah, that's a real, that's a thing.
Yeah, I
And
love it. Yeah, I'm working with some people right now, with the magic practice that I do, and I love like starting out with people and they're like, "Okay, I want to study magic and so what do I do?" And I'm like, "Okay, let's look at your chart and figure out, where the Almutin is and okay, pick a stone that's associated with that and form the stone as your teacher." And starting there, starting with
very
this
good. Yeah.
with the mineral kingdom, like this really deep connection with and understanding that, yeah, it's a chain of correspondences. Like there's a mineral, there's a plant, there's symbols that we can get to the mental stuff later. But starting at the beginning with the mineral kingdom, wow, that is so rich.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Because there's wisdom, there's billions of years of intelligence there, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's
That
the
lives in
earth
us.
evolving to
Yeah.
the point where she could produce us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
So
That's alchemy.
it
That's
is
the original
alchemy.
alchemy. Yeah,
Exactly. And if we remember that Mercury traverses all the realms, the only one of the gods that can do that,
yeah.
right? Yeah. So yeah, I love it.
Hmm.
So I just wanted to share a little bit about I'm going to share my screen, Gary, and just share the what we talked
Yes,
about my, if that's
yes,
okay. The
please. I love this. So, um,
yeah.
yeah. Maybe Andrea, before we come here, do you want to
Mhm.
talk about um do you want to talk about like your work with Eris and the other
Ah,
goddesses and the event you're going to do in Mexico City
oh, sure. Thank you.
briefly?
So I the main four main asteroid goddesses, no surprise, are very prominent in my chart. I've got well, it doesn't matter, but Ceres is a dwarf planet, and then there's Juno, Pallas Athena, and Vesta. Those are four of the first discovered bodies within the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter.
Mm.
And I also work very closely with Eris, which is a transpersonal planet. I think she's even beyond the Kuiper belt, so beyond
Yeah.
Pluto. And
How long is her cycle? It's like,
it's like 538 or something years. It's crazy. It's like double
yeah.
that of Pluto. Yeah. So yeah. So she's slow and steady and
Yeah, she demoted Pluto. Like the fact that she exists made Pluto not a planet anymore. So,
right, exactly.
yeah, like, woof.
Oops, sorry, not sorry. Yeah, that's Eris. Exactly. Exactly. I love her. And she's, yeah. So there's, so what I, again, using sky astrology and even, when I work with clients, Gary, you probably do the same thing, is I don't just rely on the 2D chart wheel. I look at the ephemeris. I look to see what's in relationship by latitude and declination.
Yeah.
That shows me the unseen relationships that are
Mm,
happening that are informing our sense of safety.
yeah.
And so what are those dynamics that are ready to come to light that we can
Mm,
really work with? And that's a beautiful thing to devote ourselves to, is these hidden relationships that are
mm,
either colluding, to keep us in a retrogressive tendency, but equally that when we work with them and bring light, the light of consciousness and in a relationship with them, become allies in our
Mm.
evolution, in our deeper embodiment, in our deeper
Mm.
manifestation of our gifts. And so one of the
Wonderful.
things that I, using the sky as a reference, I'm like, well, where do these, aside from Eris, where do these four live? Well, they're in the asteroid belt between the last personal planet, Mars, and the first social planet, Jupiter.
Yeah.
So they act as bridges because we have such a like a dualistic framework that we
Mhm.
have, that we're kind of stuck in around I doing what I want, regardless of what the culture wants, which has its own merit to a certain extent. But if we don't remember that we are creatures of that want to belong, that are meant to create and support culture making, to
Yeah.
completely dismiss ourselves and just kind of go off and do our own thing isn't going to work. At this other time, at the other side, there's also this
The,
kind of
the,
tribalism.
yeah. Like they're like the hero's journey. Like it's all the hero separating and going out on their own and they're having their own individual initiation. Yes. But that's only half.
Yeah,
They have to bring it back and
exactly.
reintegrate that into the community. That's the
That's the whole
tricky
part.
part
Exactly.
too.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly.
That's the tricky part because you basically have to, like, all of those people are people who never left.
Yeah,
So if they were
exactly.
going to accept this thing, they would have gone out and found it themselves. So you kind of have to trick them into integrating something they weren't really open to in the first place. It's like a really tricky, that second part.
It is.
Me,
It
wow,
is.
that's the tough part because I've gone out and found lots of things, but like being able to really bring it home to people in a way that they can absorb, whew, that's like a lot of work.
That's our work. That's our dharma.
That's
These are our
exactly, yeah,
gifts.
that's it. That's the real work.
And it has
Yeah.
to be integrated. You got it. And I also find a number of people who are on the opposite spectrum where they're only oriented outwardly.
Yeah.
But because they don't have that rootedness in their own, you could say again, that pan consciousness or in a sense of self, they're kind of molding themselves to fit existing ways of being, which
Hmm.
don't necessarily always really, have a resonance with their heart and their soul.
Mm.
So it's kind of like, then how do you invite those people to kind of go back to the beginning of what are your passions, what brings you joy, what
Yeah.
really intrigues you, and follow
Hmm.
that. And we're
Yeah. Follow
not
your
in a
bliss.
culture that, yeah,
Mm.
really. and
Yeah.
and that, and then remember that it's not just for us alone. So excuse me, I found that these asteroid goddesses, working with them, there's a natural alchemy and integration that's possible of a reminding us that we have it's our birthright to get excited about what we want to offer in the world. It doesn't have to be drudgery. It can be really exciting for us to do that. And the more we
Mm.
connect with what's authentically ours to do, the more it's just natural that we want to share it.
Wow.
Absolutely natural. And we
Like a
don't have to
kid.
try to force it. But the courage part is, which is what also Aries is inviting us to, is if it doesn't exist already, am I willing to break the mold and do it anyway? That's
Wow.
where most of us are like hesitant. We have to wait for the right environment, the right circumstances,
Yeah.
and we're not truly engaged with, you know, we're not engaging our life force. We're keeping it kind of at bay, waiting for the
Yeah.
just the right opportunity, the right moment, which is never going to come in that
Yeah.
sense. We have to
The
kind of
right
make it
moment is
happen.
always now.
Yeah, exactly. We just have to risk. And
And
that's
that's
part of
so
being,
Aries, right? Just like go with your instinct, go with the first, feeling, the first impulse, just
yeah.
going with it.
Yeah, and bringing consciousness, or not even bringing consciousness, but merging more with it, so that
Yeah.
we become agents that we're co-creating with ourselves. It's kind of an odd thing
Mm.
to say, but where like personality or self-identity is an agent of soul.
Wow.
We don't have to be separate. We don't have to keep ourselves, soul is something, out there, or something that I have to, it's like it's already within. How do we engage
Mhm.
with that primal desire to come
Mm.
out into life? Aries, Taurus,
Yeah.
Gemini.
Nice. Nice.
So anyway, yes, I'm doing this thing in Mexico City on September 8th. Um, I have my friend Claudia Ochoa to thank for this. She and I met through Adam's work and in Bhutan a number of years ago, and she was part of my Venus group, my Capricorn Venus group, and no,
Right.
Gemini Venus group. And she asked me, I told her I know she lives in Mexico City, and I told her I was coming back, and she asked if I would be willing to do a teaching, and I was there, and I'm like, sure. So she's helped me organize everything, and
It's so
it's
wonderful to have
it
people like
is,
that. God,
yeah,
it's such a blessing.
she's awesome.
Yeah,
So it's going to be a full day
fantastic. So how do
workshop.
people find out more about that and sign up if they want to?
It's on my website under the upcoming events, all the
On your
information
website,
on my
just
website, Andrea Michelle Heckel, HAECKEL.com, which will be
mhm,
in the show notes. And
excellent.
yeah, and they can contact Claudia. She's the person who's
Fantastic.
doing the registration. Yeah.
Yeah, I loved what you did with the Venus material for the last Sky Astrology Conference where you work with the asteroids there.
Oh,
And I love those gals so much. I mean, they bring so much richness and like um depth and so yeah, I was just really like, yes, like because it'd been a while since I mean, I always like even in my magical elections, I'm always like the last step for me is like, okay, let's see if we can get any of the goddesses on board,
right,
like
right, right.
and like I'm still, but it's been a while since I had like a lot of work going on with that. And so I get kind of like I forget what you call it, like living vicariously when I see people like you doing that. I'm just like, yes,
Right,
'cause,
right.
yeah, I haven't been able to do it myself so much lately. So it's really
Well,
awesome.
I'm taking up the mantle, Gary, and I love
Yes,
how
yes,
uh,
go. Love it.
it was great how excited you got about Eris and what it sparked in you around when I
Yeah,
mentioned that Eris is going to be, she's right now on the celestial equator. She moves so slowly. She's hovering.
yeah.
She's still technically in south declination by arc minute, but she's going to be emerging for the first time in north declination next June. That's a
Wow.
radical, huge
That's a radical shift
change.
because, the celestial equator is basically the equator of the Earth. If you imagine the Earth like a person, and if you imagine the person who's like what they call an apple shape,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
like kind of like me, uh, it's the belt line, it's the
yes,
midline of the, and you project that out into space, right?
yep,
That's the celestial equator, and Eris was discovered in south declination, right?
yes,
So
yeah.
she was discovered in the lower part of the earth, which is interesting because that's where we come from, Africa,
Mm-hmm,
right? But it's
mm-hmm.
also actually the least populated part of the planet now.
Uh,
All of our culture, the stuff that we think of as human was developed in the north,
right.
even though we come from the south. So it's really interesting that she was discovered in the south and now she's crossing to come to the north. So it feels like a revolution in consciousness of
Very
like,
much.
I mean, she was so much about upsetting the apple cart, like metaphorically and literally, anyways,
Yeah.
and to be discovered down below, and what we'll talk about a lot more with that diagram you were bringing up about the how do you call it? The pan personal?
The pan personal, yeah.
Pan personal, like this instinctive part of us that belongs with the minerals and the plants and the animals, right? Like
Yes.
um, this sort of earth being part of us, right?
Yep.
The part of us that belongs to the
Exactly.
earth. That's this child of the earth, right?
Yep. Precisely.
And now she's coming across the celestial equator into the north part, which is actually who we think we are.
Right.
All
Right.
this stuff that we've developed over the last couple thousand years that we think of as culture and blah blah blah. Like she's now introducing this one part of ourselves to the other part. Like,
Exactly.
woo,
Oh, Gary.
wow.
Yes,
That's
and
yeah, when you told me that, I was like, holy shit, that's big.
it is big, and I
Really
love
big.
that you get that. And
Yeah.
it's 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 also she was discovered in Cetus, which Nick
Hmm.
Fiorenza calls Cetus the sea monster, the techno-bureaucratic sea monster of collective human fear.
Ah,
Now let that sink in, right?
Nick was so amazing,
He was
man.
incredible, yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's to me, it's like, And ultimately, what are we afraid of? We're afraid of our own instinctual power. It's in our
Mm,
instinctual bodies that our vitality, our life force lives. We get it from the earth. Who gets
yeah.
it? There's a symbiotic relationship, earth and our star, the sun. And the sun is a transducer of all the cosmos. So literally, it's just like we don't have to focus on a lot. We focus on one or two things, everything comes through that. That's why heliacal cycles are so rich, right? The
Yeah.
sun is the parent. The
Hmm.
sun parents us in all
Hmm.
ways. It provides all the nourishment we
Hmm.
ever need. So to work with the sun in one particular planet over a period of time, like the Venus cycle, we are literally getting nourished, enriched in the Venus feminine function, her way of translating the love, consciousness, vitality of the sun.
Mm, wow. Wow.
So this is what I love when you got excited about Eris and you wanted to refer it back to one of my favorite things that you brought up, which is the first Sky Astrology Conference about the larger Mars Venus synodic cycle and
Hmm.
how right around the Gulf War period, but it lasts for a decade or so, we were at the bottom of this Mars period, 100 years of this Mars
Yeah,
cycle.
sort of chaotic period where all the previous, you know, cultural certainties are broken apart and scattered about, and
Yes,
and before being mixed together in a new way and alchemically brought into a new form, a new renaissance, if you will.
exactly. And
Yeah, so
this,
there was this period, and what's really fascinating about that period, which was basically the 2000s, right? That's when all the alphabet organizations came into being. I mean, Google and YouTube and Facebook and all this stuff, all of this new, and what is this stuff doing but like pitting us against each other and like, polarizing and all of this stuff, which is, and it's kind of like that the first the more obvious function of Eris when she threw that apple, it was like pitting, okay, there's a contest now, like who's the fairest,
right,
right? Which she didn't actually say. She just said to the fairest,
right, right.
right? But then the question becomes,
Yeah.
who's the fairest, right? And so this primal splitting apart into these polarities that
Yes.
is that like and I mean, this is something that isn't mentioned a lot either, the polarity of like Homo sapiens versus Homo neanderthalensis, like early competition, like we cohabited Europe with another human species for 30,000 years.
Wow, I didn't realize it was that long. Yeah.
And one of us didn't make it,
Mm-hmm.
and that we outcompeted them is the standard theory. There was some interaction back when I was like taking anthropology classes in the late 80s. They were still trying to say there was no,
Right, right.
sexual, no significant interbreeding. And I'm thinking to myself, dude, come on. And then the movie Quest for Fire comes out. Do you remember that one where
Yes, yes,
the
yes.
Homo sapiens and the Neanderthal lady are, well, no, the Neanderthal guys and the Homo sapien lady, they're going at it. It's like, it's so hilarious. But there's this primal like division, and some people have even postulated that Neanderthals were some robust MFers, man. I mean, they hunted bison with spears in close quarters, like hand-to-hand combat with bison. And if you've never been up close to a bison, it's impossible to fathom how freaking huge and
Huge.
powerful they are.
Yeah.
But you have to be close to one to feel like what that kind of confrontation would be.
Mm-hmm.
It's really, really a lot. And these cats were doing this on a day-to-day basis, and some people theorize that in the process of competing with these other humans, there might have been some predation going on, and we might have had to deal with that, cannibalism or something. And that's maybe where some of this fear comes from too, like the
Mm-hmm.
boogeyman, like, because what we do know for sure is that human beings, Homo sapiens, um, there's a bottleneck in the population at some point. Like our backs were to the wall. We don't know the exact numbers, but it was thousands, maybe even hundreds of number, like the total population of Homo sapiens on the planet Earth was really small. And we don't know exactly what happened, but we found a way to overcome that. And that survival, that's the hero's journey. Like our backs were to the wall, we were this close to extinction, but somehow we found a way to survive and to compete and to make ourselves, what some people call the apex, species or whatever. um that part of our humanity is really, really, really um not very well understood, I don't think. Like there's like there that part of us is there's it's like with communication, like the words that you say, the words that you choose mean things for sure. I mean, there's a lot of tricks and plays that, people will say, oh, you didn't say this, so you must be that, and blah. Like but really the most the biggest part of the communication comes through the tone of our voice and the body language and the nonverbal part, actually, and it's like that whole, that iceberg metaphor with psychology where they talk about like the vast part of our consciousness is below, it's
Yes.
unconscious, right? And this part of our being that you're talking about, that's connected with the mineral and plant and animal realms, and that survived, predation certainly by like saber-toothed tigers and God knows what.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm not entirely sure that we lived alongside of those beings, but by nasty beings of one sort or another.
Yeah.
By that, we competed with other human species. We made it through some kind of bottleneck, like with our backs against the wall. That's like a really, really important part of ourselves to be in touch with, because I think like this deluge of like fear mongering that happens when you know yourself as that, like for me, like my first Camino was, I was homeless, dude. I learned to live by my wits on the streets. And the gift of that, Andrea, was that there has never been a question in my life ever again, like, am I gonna make it?
Mhm.
Come on. No, I know that I'm a survivor. I know it. There is, you know what I'm saying? And
Yes.
and
Yes.
we as humans, that's our story. And when we really own that and connect with it deeply, I think like there's an immunity to all this fucking bullshit that we're constantly, sabotaged into, like a deluge of whatever, trying to control us with narratives and whatever.
Right.
Like
Because
there's a natural immunity that comes with this deeper self-knowledge.
yes. And one of the things I would also add is the fear. There's fear of survival, which is basic, but it's become like its own kingdom. And I think my belief is it's part of it is because we've lost touch with what I call our psychic biodiversity.
Mm,
We have a paucity of psychic biodiversity, which
mm,
in some parlance is the shadow.
yeah,
Shadow contains our vital essence.
yeah.
Here's what's interesting in my research and the things that have been drawing me, Gary, is there is something that anthropologists have coined called wilderness rapture.
Mm,
So there is joy. That is where primal joy lives.
mm,
And Craig Foster, again, coming back to him, for years before he had that relationship, that magical relationship with the octopus, which changed his and so many people's lives. He and his brother were filmmakers, and they were fascinated with these indigenous cultures on the earth, and like
mm,
really trying to preserve their way, a record of their ways. And so they did a film called the something dance. Shoot, I'll have to remember. But it was with the San Bushmen of the Kalahari.
mm.
and they were like teachers and mentors to Craig and his brother. And
Wow.
he said there would be times when they were like on these long, laborious treks to track an animal, and these would be going for days on end, and all of a sudden the sun tracker would just start to laugh, and Craig said he would look around and he would try to see what was funny, and he realized it was just the joy of being alive, of being connected to life, that was bubbling up from him. And again,
Wow.
like anthropologists call it wilderness rapture.
Wow.
This is what awaits us. And
Wow. This
joy
was
is
the thing
not,
I didn't have a name for that I was telling you about on Camino. Yeah.
yes,
Wilderness Rapture.
exactly.
That's it. Wow.
That level of connection to ourselves
Mm,
as earthbound beings. And earthbound is not limitation. This is the magic of Capricorn. When we
yeah.
discover that Capricorn is limitation and time-based things, but when we move through and hold the context of that in our heart, we use time then to make the most of it. And
Mm,
that's one of the things that Ceres is teaching us, a
mm,
new relationship with time as she's going
mm,
in very deep south declination through
mm,
Capricorn, squaring
mm,
the nodal axis. Are we, and also, are we going to suffer from our past? Are we going to continue to victimize ourselves based on our
mm,
past? Or are we going to initiate ourselves, Ceres, into
mm,
a new way of being, where we're parenting ourselves, where
mm.
we honoring and grieving how much we have outsourced others, whether it be parents or teachers or communities, even, to find our sense of ourself and really come back to what is mine to do here,
Mm.
to be engaged with all of life in that primal way first. Because for me, when we find our sense of belonging in the larger sense, then relating with our human kin, we don't need as much from people. There isn't as much emotional neediness or contortion or
Wow.
controlling, because we are already situated in our first home, which is
Wow.
the earth, which is our
Yeah.
greater family. And then we
Yeah.
can build human culture from that. That's what the indigenous
Wow.
wisdom is all about.
Wow. Yeah. Somehow that just happened for me, like naturally, instinctively, like going out and hitchhiking around the country and finding that part of me that was like, I remember being on the side of the road, like first thing in the morning, and there's nothing but me and the road and the planet,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
feeling like that. Wow. Like
yeah.
just that sense of like belonging to some organism that was freaking beyond anything I could really comprehend or communicate, but knowing it,
But
feeling it like
feeling
so
it,
deeply,
exactly.
and knowing that there was something on this road that was carrying me through that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, wow, it's so incredible.
Yes. It, it's like we literally feel aligned, just like the hunters do when they lock in with the animal that they're hunting. There's a sacred union that happens, life encountering life. And
Mm,
there's this automatic, like Craig said that Craig Foster, he said he asked one time one of the sound trackers, he's like, do you ever feel sorry for the animals that you're killing? And the tracker looked at him like, why? That would be disrespectful. Like
yeah,
they don't anthropomorphize or add additional layers of meaning on something. They're so connected, they don't need that anymore.
yeah,
And not that meaning itself is bad, but if we are solely like trying to be nourished off of meaning in our minds, but we don't have that deeper connection with life, with the intrinsic aliveness and vital force of life, then it's keeping us spinning and feeling
yeah.
isolated and disconnected.
Yeah, no, I mean, I relate to that. I eat venison from the woods here on my property, and um, yeah, like there is, I wouldn't exactly call it sadness, but there's a deep reverence and awe and respect right after you kill
Yeah,
take a life, and there's a responsibility to make that count for something and to
yeah,
harvest the meat and
very.
everything responsibly. Um, but I really get the sense like I'm sure they're aware that I'm hunting them,
Mm-hmm.
and yet they coexist with me. I walk every other part of the year. Besides hunting season is a very brief part of the year. It's during mating season, which makes it a lot easier.
Mm.
But every other part of the year, like I'm walking the land with them, and I don't get the sense that there's any kind of anything to feel sorry about. Like they're happily giving themselves to the land, to life, to me if I need that meat, to
Yeah.
whatever, you know? Yeah.
Gary, what you
So
said about that reverence and that sadness in the sense, to me, it might be, I don't want to superimpose on this, but grieving is a natural way that our heart opens.
yeah,
So to grieve a little bit, even about nothing in particular, sometimes too,
yeah,
just to feel the poignancy of something,
yes. That's
it's just a
yeah,
way that our heart opens and grace brings us into, it
yeah.
begins the relationship
Yeah, it's a
with
sense of
parts of ourselves.
gratitude
Yeah.
and yeah, some sadness, but like of a sacred connection, like that's who I am. I mean, we evolved that way as hunters, hunter gatherers. So yeah. Anyway, I don't want to get too,
No, but this is a great longer discussion, and I think that we're probably going to break this podcast into two parts, which is great. But what's also, and it's not like, I hope people listening to this are not like, does Andrea want us to all go back to being hunter-gatherer? No, that's not what it is. We can dive
Gary
back
does.
to it would be fun, but we can't. It's just like we are, as again, I'm quoting Craig Foster a lot, we have become tame. We cannot go back to simply being wild. And wild is not like where we're not showered or wild is just that part of us that is co-creating with life, that
Yeah,
is so intimate with
yeah,
the life force that we are,
yeah,
that we have our creativity is just online, our
yeah,
connectedness with all of life, we know
yeah.
our sense of belonging. That's what I'm
Yeah.
talking about, and we can
Yeah,
do
and
that.
no, we can't. There's no returning to the Garden of Eden. Like we cannot become wild again, but we can become feral.
Yeah, and we can
We-
we can tap in that wildness in us and
Yeah.
foster that, and
And
our
that's what
wildness.
a feral animal is in touch with its wildness, but it's also in touch with the fact that it's got to make a living and it's making a living on the edges of this other thing
Right,
that
yeah.
we call civilization or whatever. So it's really kind of a hermetic thing
It
in that
is.
it lives in that liminal place between the truly wild and the truly tamed, you
Yeah,
know? So
and
I think of myself as a feral being. I really do. Like politically, like my first political alignment would have definitely been like basically, an anarchist, and that just so people know, that's not like embracing chaos or anything.
not
And
at all.
an anarchist in the sense of like, I don't buy any of that bullshit. I don't believe in any of it. It's
Very
essentially
erasure.
like being an agnostic, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
it's not that I'm like an atheist. It's not that I don't believe politics can work at all, ever. But like lately, I don't see much, and so it's like I'm not attending a particular church. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. And
Um, and that ability to exist outside of that and just say no, like I'm not that, you know that's being feral. That's like choosing, it's an animal that says no, you don't own me. I'm not going to be, fenced in or put on a leash or any of this other shit that we do, like
right.
no, I'm not buying that shit. Yeah, if you want to support me and come into relationship with me and like have this, being in a relationship with a feral animal is really interesting that way because a lot of people, take care of animals that are, that are not theirs per se, but the animal is still somewhat dependent on them. Yeah,
Mm,
it's a really, I think of myself as a feral being, really. I do.
mm,
Ever since I was homeless,
mm.
there's been times where I belonged more like after I got married and bought a house, I thought and I had to get a bank account. I didn't even have a bank account. My wife was like, "You kind of need a bank account, babe."
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah,
So
that's
then I
fair.
thought I had to vote and blah, blah, blah. And I became more and more tame. And at some
Yeah,
point, I was just like, no,
right.
I'm a feral being. Like, and I'm going back to that because like becoming more tame, I can see where this is headed. And no, it's killing me, dude.
Yeah, it's what you're talking about and what I'm referring to about our wildness is simply our primal connection with life.
Yeah.
Straight up. Life as it wants to, as we're able to whatever degree we are to let it flow to allow ourselves to be in greater relationship with life
Mm. Yeah.
and our own vital nature and whatever propels us forward that is not always going to be comfortable or make sense to our logical minds. And then those of us that are feral and wild, we attract other people who are that way. And that's what I love about your Aquarius, rising is like you're still a communal being, but you
Mm.
want to be with others who like value freedom
Yes.
and the capacity to develop their own creative dharma, passion,
Mhm.
gifts alongside others who want to do that, but it might look very different. But
Yeah.
the shared value is freedom and whatever serves the purpose of an evolving Aquarian society.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
not too future. It's also very firmly planted in what's here and what's possible now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I love
Thank you for that. Wow, that's a beautiful way of saying that. So, do you want to transition into that diagram and
it.
talk
Sure.
about and if we end up splitting this up at this point, that's cool too. Do we have time to continue
I
this with?
do. I don't have
Yeah,
any.
let's do it.
Okay.
Let's do it.
Fantastic.
Let's transition into the second part that I so rudely uh sidetracked you on. Um and you're going to be talking more about this stuff at some point too, right?
Yeah, I'm doing a webinar. It's kind of like not just a webinar, it's kind of like it's going to be like a half a day teaching transmission, whatever workshop on
Hmm.
September 15th.
Nice.
And I introduced this just barely in that Cancer Lunation webinar. But this is one of the first things that's coming up because I feel, Gary, like my relationship with astrology is changing.
Hmm.
What I want to put out for people who already know me probably know that I'm not interested in appealing to everyone.
Yeah.
I am a storyteller through astrology. And when I look at a chart and I look at what's happening, whether it's a natal chart or even by transits, a story emerges in me. That's the shamanic part of me, is to
Mm.
like be the storyteller. And
Yeah.
I like it to be loose enough that people can formulate their own meaning from it. I don't want to tell people this is what's going to happen on this day, so be prepared for anyway. I think that's taking power away from people. And maybe a lot of people prefer just to not have to do that. I want to be told
Yeah.
what to do. And that's fine too. We all have that somewhere. I know I do. So anyway, this is kind of what's been emerging from this deepening into my own instinctual pan personal relating. Is what's been
Mm.
arising for me is this, how the decans or the decans, deacons, deacons.
Yeah.
I
Deacons.
keep wanting to
I
think
like
of
to call
the
them
religious
deacons because
figure.
it sounds like
Deacons.
those cats in the church.
Right, the deacons, that's right. Okay, the deacons. So the broken up into the three sections of 10. And I love, the Chaldean method and I love the triplicity system and they work for different things. But what's been arising for me, I had no intention of like doing this again, this just kind of came forward,
Mm.
is to work. And I was looking at my chart first, and now I can't help see it in other people's charts this way. It's just naturally, instinctively coming up. Is that the first 10 degrees of a planet or an angle indicates a desire of that planet or angle to become more conscious of places where, on you could say the incoherent part, where we automatically act, where we act as like automatons, which is kind of like what the instinct unconscious is.
Yeah.
It's like where it's just reactivity,
From our animal
based on,
self, if you will, like our animal brain or something.
yeah, exactly. It's based in the sympathetic nervous system,
Yeah.
right? Which doesn't have the balance of the
That
parasympathetic.
makes a lot of sense to me, because one of the first times I actually felt fully seen, and this was after many years of being an astrologer. Austin Coppock wrote a book on the decans, and
Mm.
I at the time I was living in a community where I had to go down the street to the mailbox. And so I went for a walk to the mailbox, and I was so excited about getting this book. I stopped, sat on like a wall or something by the road and opened the book. And I thought I was just going to take a peek. And the first chapter on the first decan of Aries, I was so engrossed because the way he speaks of it as like this, the symbol is an axe, and it's like person chopping out a clearing in the forest, claiming space to within this like um grand beingness of nature and claiming this personal space to call their own.
Wow.
I felt so, like for the first time in my life, somebody, because people talk about Aries, this, that, the warrior, blah, 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 this, that, and the other. I was like, that's it. And that's where my Mercury and Venus conjunction is.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, wow. I love it already. Like you're definitely speaking to something I'm in touch with that first
Awesome, Gary.
weekend.
Wow, that
Yeah,
that feels really good to hear you say that, because
yeah.
it's literally like it's not where we are. It's we feel ourselves so connected with all life, and yet we also can, again, it's that talk of biodiversity. We love the it's like unity consciousness in its diversity, and
Mm,
the beauty of recognizing oneself as a multiplicity,
mm-hmm, mm,
including oneself. That's the biodiversity that I'm talking about, which has to originate and has to be rooted in the instinctual pan-personal. So
do you
those are
want
the
to talk
first.
more about that word pan-personal?
Yeah, I'd love to, because the word pan in the Greek is a prefix for all, like encompassing everything.
Everything, yeah.
So again, this is all of earthly life, all of our kin, you could say.
Mineral nation, plant nation, animal nation,
Yep. Yep.
everything.
Everything. Even like, all the elements, the primal
Mm,
elements,
yeah.
all of that too. The devas, the sprites, all of the elementals and all that.
Nice.
Yep. Everything.
Fairies,
Yep.
mermaids, unicorns.
A lot of them. Yes, exactly. Yep. You got it. And what I love too is, Pan, the satyr, the word panic and pandemonium comes from Pan. And one
Mm,
of the things that's said about Pan is he created panic because what Pan represents is our instinctual nature that we've become so separated from that we are afraid of it. We're afraid of ourselves.
mm,
This is one of the things that Eris is illuminating for us too. We're afraid of our own power. We're afraid of
mm,
our own desire for freedom.
mm,
Because again, we're so engrossed in simply the human realm of what it means to be a human being and try to fit into a culture that's broken. But
mm.
unless we find our belonging here first to inform this is just, like a hamster. We're running in this hamster wheel.
Wow.
And so I love that Pan also is here. And one of the things I love too is that I'm sure you know this, both Pan and Mercury come from Arcadia, which is
Yeah.
considered very wild in
Yes.
the Greek. And the fact that they're partile conjunct in that solar eclipse chart with Eris, it's
Perfect.
like the three amigos of like instinct
Yeah.
right there,
Wow.
wildness.
Wow.
So,
Wildness. Yeah. Yeah. That's a thing that a lot of people, I think, don't realize because Hermes, Mercury, is a god of liminal places.
yep.
It also has rulership over wild animals, and so
Yes.
this wildness or this really even this feral space, like people who live between in those liminal places, like wanderers, like peregrinos, um, they live in this mercurial place and they're and it because it's liminal, it's not here or there, it's actually pan, it's able
Yes.
to be both places at once in a sense and to
Yes.
encompass everything
Exactly.
because of not being here or there.
Beautiful. I love that. And bringing in Pan again in the Arcadian version of the Demeter myth, it was Pan who cajoled Ceres. He, not taking herself too serious. She reached the end of basically human suffering. She became human for a time.
Hmm.
And she, it's like,
Mourning her daughter.
yes, mourning
Yeah.
her. Well, and for me, it's the mourning of the loss of a naivete,
Yes.
of like that things can have to always stay the same, that there's no, we need to be pushed as human beings. So much comes online when we get out of our comfort zone. We
Mm.
really, it's like, again, in my octopus
Backs
teacher,
against the wall, right? That
it's
that
like he
evolutionary
talks,
bottleneck.
yeah, in my octopus teacher, Craig Foster talks about even before he goes into the relationship with the octopus, which in and of itself is fantastic. He talks about going into the cold ocean
mm,
of the South African Atlantic over and over and over again, and what it did to awaken endorphins and
mm,
receptors in his brain. It literally awakens part of our physiology that helps us, that unites our triune brain, you could say. Our
mm,
unites our whole, and that's Mars. That's Aries is the full complement of the
mhm,
brain. We're one unit, one singular unit. And that's what being pushing ourselves into like outside of our comfort zone, that's where our gifts lie. That's
mm.
the hero's journey. Fuck,
Yeah.
in this the day and age, the hero's journey is simply taking another road to work, you know? I mean, honestly, that's how complacent we've gotten. I'm being a little, silly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm Virgo enough to like, and like I can go on a journey like even in this little field in if you get down on your knees in hands and knees and like travel through a field of grass, like there really is like what do you call like to see eternity in a blade of grass or
Yeah.
whatever. Like there really is that possibility. But yeah, taking a different road to work, like if you do it right, yeah, that could be the hero's journey. But no,
Uh,
probably.
no, what I mean in terms of like how little we want to get out of our comfort zone.
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
yeah, exactly.
yeah.
But that's where becoming more alive actually lives. And
Hmm.
so we don't have to go swimming in the the cold Atlantic Ocean, but whatever it is for us to do, however we can become ignited again.
Yeah, I mean, for me, one of the really
Yes.
stark contrasts, I spend a lot of time by myself here on my farm,
Mhm.
and so being in a group experience for like 30, 40 days, like constantly surrounded by people,
That can
that
be
was
hard.
really pushing me out of my comfort zone. So it was
Yeah.
kind of the opposite of like the hero's journey in a way of like really forcing myself to be part of a social unit and to
Mm-hmm.
accept that and to accept the limitations of that and everything.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah, for
Oh,
sure.
yeah. So it's going to be different for each person. I love that you brought that up.
Yeah.
So then we have the second decan, which is the 11 through 20, which is this is the strictly human in terms of like a corporeal human, right?
Mm,
Like the beginning of like it's kind of like mildly akin to like cancer, like in that kind of area.
the
It's
human
like,
experience.
yeah, the very human experience of developing a unique self,
Hmm.
developing an identity ultimately that's sourced from both of these, but is always in relationship. This is a lemniscate, right? They're in relationship. There's an alchemy happening.
Mm,
This is the lemniscate of the magician, right? Mercury, Hermes.
yeah.
So there's a constant dialogue happening. The self is always being informed by one's greater mother, you could say, father, and
Mm,
the social milieu, the human social milieu that we live in.
mm,
So, how do we become a self rooted in what I know is mine to do and is malleable enough to receive feedback?
mm,
That engagement of a personal self that also has enough vulnerability and humility to be
mm,
always in dialogue, as David White calls, like being in having a conversation. He uses
mm,
the word conversation a lot, being part of the conversation with
mm.
life. It's a
Yeah,
dialogue. That's also very mercurial, right? And that's what I love about
yeah,
follow the path of vulnerability, ask for the visible and invisible help. So that's the second decan. And then we have the third, the 21 to the 30 degrees or 29, which is the social and transpersonal, which is culture.
yeah.
Building a culture that is beyond simply our needs, but includes us, where we're not excluding ourselves, where we find joy in our work. We find joy in giving of myself, but I'm replenished in my great mother. I'm sourced from the greater world, the greater resources of the earth. So I'm not
Mm,
depleting myself. I'm a generative. That's why I have the sun in the back. That's the symbol of the individuated human, right?
mm,
Is the one who is central to one's own truth and path and equally in relationship to as much life and psychic biodiversity as possible at any one time. And it's always an ongoing process. That's why, oh, I don't have it down here. Bummer. But I just want to bring something up really quickly here about where I wrote in my in the product page I designed, I wrote the three natures here: the instinct and pan-personal, the self and personal, and the social and transpersonal. These are the natures that comprise a full human being.
Wow.
The individuating self, I didn't say individuated because it's never complete. The individuating self is in dynamic, integrated, and integrating relationship with all three simultaneously. That, to me, is the true gift and purpose, you could say, of a human life. Each of us doing our own part in this. And we can
Wow.
have mentors and people that support us, but how can we bring it back to what is mine to do and not just copy and paste what other people are doing? And that's what we've been doing for so long, because we're just relying on this. And this is where we isolate.
Mm.
If we rely on any one of these things without the relationship of all of them,
Hmm.
we're isolating somehow, or we're diffusing
Mm.
ourselves, which is another form of isolating. We're giving too much of ourselves. We're overwhelming.
Yeah.
There's no I in there.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a lot, as I said, I'm very familiar with, um, my instinctive self, and like I identify as a feral being like for a very long time. And then, I developed a unique personality as an astrologer, and I began to have community experiences. But to to figure out, like, especially when there's a lot of pressure coming from the collective, for the individual to behave a certain way, and to try and to not get pulled into, like you said, those dichotomies of like, no, 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 it's the individual, that's absolutely paramount over the collective, or no, 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 it's the collective has to be paramount over the individual, and to really figure out, like, what is the proper alchemy
Yes.
for this situation, that situation, for me right now. um yeah, I've been thinking about this for a long time, so it's really interesting that you bring this up, because it's like, how much social and transpersonal can I really do, and as a healthy amount for me right now in my life, and like being able to say no and to push that out a little bit if I need more room. And then to realize, hey, wow, you've been pushing that out for a while now, and maybe you need to relax and like go sleep in an albergue with 30 people in a room snoring.
Right, right, exactly. Yep, yep, exactly.
It's a lot, like what you're describing. I love it. And I think I love everything you said. And I agree 1,000%. But like, just to own that, like actually doing that and finding that alchemy and finding that dynamic balance at any given time,
Yeah.
it's a lot.
It is a lot because we are in the habit of making things overly complex, I would say, Gary.
Mm,
But
yeah.
I agree with you. I don't want to dismiss that is true. And so it's not necessarily for everybody. It's for those who really have a deep calling to who long for more of themselves, to
Mm,
really, really want to know their own sense of belonging, where they
wow.
belong.
Yeah. The
There's
other thing,
Mhm.
oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Well, it's just, when we belong to something more than just our human companions, our human kin,
Yeah.
then relating with our human kin, we have more empathy, we have more capacity and availability because we're rooted in something so much greater.
Mm,
And it builds upon itself. And then everything is back, in the Mayan cultures and a lot of indigenous cultures, everything goes back to giving thanks to Mother Nature, giving thanks to the earth for the blessings, becoming an individual in the society, knowing my personal place, like differentiated place, the differentiated unity.
mm,
That's what the self is. That's the capital S self, which is
yeah.
all three of these in relationship
Yeah.
somehow. And, you know, it's an ongoing thing. And, you know, some people this might not be interesting at all. And that's the thing that I'm risking, to be honest with you, to be
Yeah.
transparent. I'm risking I might lose a lot of people who don't want this, don't want what I'm going to be offering with astrology and
No,
offering more.
I think you might find that it's even the opposite. There might be a lot more people hungry for this than you think.
Well, maybe I can only
Yeah,
do
I
what's mine
feel
to do.
like there's a growing hunger for something more, something beyond. Like people realize like whatever we have right now, it's not fucking working. And we need to try some different things and we need to be open to different things and we need to be open to going back to the fucking beginning and starting over
Yeah.
if necessary, you know? Um, and one of the things that I love about this is like I did a podcast with Krista DeMaio of Practical Astros earlier this year. She's a student of Kelly Lee Phipps, my old buddy. Um, and we were talking about the three decans of Aries. And when you were talking about the three decans, like I can see like the two of wands, the three of wands, and the four of wands are the cards that go with the three decans of Aries. So in the Two of Wands, you've got this guy standing there with a globe in his hand, and it's like literally this relationship of me with all of life, like pan personal, right? Like my relationship with the minerals and the plants and the animals, with the glow, with Earth. And then in the Three of Wands, this dude he's made a choice. Okay, I'm going to send all my ships out for this particular mission. I'm going to focus like this is who I am. This is what I'm here for, right? And then in the Four of Wands, there's like this gateway where there's this couple and there's this celebration of like this social communal celebration. So I can really see what you're talking about right there in the pictures of the cards themselves. And so I think you're hitting on something really
Oh,
profound, actually.
cool.
Yeah,
That's good
I
to
love it. I'm
thank you.
looking forward to more, please.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. My Hermetic homie. Yeah.
Yes, you're welcome. Yeah. And so yeah, I invite people to check out that event, both events that you're doing. You're one of my favorite people.
Mm.
And it's interesting. Recently, I had another lady author, Hermetic author, on the podcast, Marlena Seven Brimner.
Oh,
But
yeah.
while I was away, one of my students contacted her about working with her, and she wrote me saying, I just want to make sure it's okay that I'm working with your people and I'm not stepping on toes. I'm like, dude, that's totally the idea. Like, of course, like I want them to be able to pull from multiple sources of wisdom and teachings, and so yeah, I'm really happy to be inviting people to jump into your pool of connection and teachings and to receive the wisdom that's there. I mean, you're doing a lot of stuff, and I'm really hopeful that you and I can continue collaborating.
I love
We both have connections in Africa these days, and
you.
a little bird told me that, something might be happening there. We'll see. I don't know.
Yep, yep, yep.
Uh, so,
Yes,
so
yes.
yeah, it's kind of like this limnoscape. There's Andrea and there's Gary, and then there's, so we're meeting someplace along
We
the way
are.
there.
Love it. It's so juicy. It's so good, Gary. And what do you have coming up now? Are you still, what's
Yeah, I'm doing an event this Saturday, assuming we publish this before Saturday,
two?
with NCGR San Francisco, where I'm talking about the Mercury cycle. I'm actually, for the first time, talking about this new work that I'm beginning to generate with the Mercury phases
Oh,
that
excellent.
I haven't really formally presented on that yet.
Yay.
Um, but a lot of that is talking about what we were speaking of earlier about going back to the sky as the primary frame of reference. The first 2000 years of astrology was based on the horizon as the primary frame of reference. And so that's what the Mercury phases bring us back to, is this, where is Mercury vis-a-vis the horizon? Like, yes, it's in this sign or this house, and that gives us a lot of really good information. But what does the horizontal relationship give us, and how does that add to the picture? Um, So I'm doing that. And then next month in September, I'm going to be part of the Astromagia conference again this year. Last year was great. And I'm really honored and excited to be part of that again this year. It's like it's the first and only conference specifically dedicated to astral magic.
That's great.
It's an online conference. There's a link for that on my website, but astromagia.com. And I'm going to be talking about this idea of alchemy as one of the three hermetic arts. So we have astrology and we have magic, and like there's a new understanding of bringing those two things together that's happening in the astrology community. But what about alchemy?
Mm.
Like, how can we bring alchemy back into the conversation between astrology and magic so that we have these three parts that make a whole? So that's the talk I'm going to be giving on that in September. And I think that's it for me for events for this year, which is fine because I need to I need to get some writing done at some point. So it's nice to have some events in summer and be on Camino and that say again what that experience of unity with nature. What was that
Oh,
he called it?
pan conscious or oh no, oh, you mean wilderness rapture?
Wilderness Rapture. Oh my God, it was so incredible to have some summer wilderness rapture.
Yeah, oh gosh.
Um, but yeah, after that I'll probably be going back into my hermit's cave and doing some writing and stuff.
Perfect. Is this going to be part of your second book on Mercury?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. That's the deal. I need to complete the second book. It's been too long and I need to get my words on the paper already.
Nice.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So great to be back with you again. I had such an amazing time at Sky Astrology Conference, and the people that you brought were so like really wholesome community members. You know, they were really I just felt like that was a statement about you. The people that you brought was, you know, their presence was really beautiful for me, and I think that says as much about you as it does about them.
Oh,
Um, so thank you. It's really wonderful to be here with you again, and I'm
likewise.
looking forward to what this interaction brings forward in the future. And people stay tuned because, like I said, birds are talking, and see
Birds
where
are
it leads
talking. That's
us.
right. That's right. I love it. Thank you, Gary. It's
Yeah.
always a privilege and a pleasure to sit with you and to
Mhm.
receive your magic and your commitment
Likewise.
and devotion. Yay.
Likewise.
Yep.
Okay.
All right.
Bye for now.
Bye, folks.